Born in Brooklyn. Yeah, before it was Brooklyn. It was nice until the early to mid 70s when the neighborhood started changing. We were one of the last ones to go, and it was kind of dangerous. My parents didn't want me going to junior high in Brooklyn where we were living. So my earliest memories of my involvement with art are when I was young. My mother would get magazines that would come to the house, Women's Day and Family Circle, and there would be these catalogs that would come for sheets and towels and rugs and things, and I was fascinated by the teeny tiny, infinitesimally reproduced patterns. So I would sit there and I would cut them out with fingernail scissors. At the time I knew not what an X-Acto knife was. So I would use cuticle scissors or fingernail scissors, and I would cut out, I still have a little box of things that I cut out when I was a child. So I would just amass them, and I would love to sit and play with them and arrange them. And one of my mother's friends, when they were moving or getting rid of stuff, they gave us this bookcase that fit well, and it was just a plain painted wooden bookcase, and I decided I was going to decorate it. So I decorated it with all these magazine cutouts in a very sort of pop art style of the time. You know, this was like the late 60s, early 70s, and I had a great time with it. It was the first real work of art that I ever really made. Well, yeah, of any size. I mean, back then I would decorate these little like sample boxes from aspirin. I would paint them with nail polish, or Testor's hobby paints, you know, for model making, and then I would put the teeny tiny, I still have several of these things, the teeny tiny seashells from the Sheets catalog on them, and yeah, it was a very sporadic endeavor as a child. And when I was in my 20s, I bought my first camera, and immediately thereafter I felt the limitations of that camera, because I wanted to basically, you know, stand on balconies and parapets and rooftops and shoot, you know, these urban landscape panoramas, and, you know, zoom in and get excruciatingly infinitesimal detail of building, you know, features. And right away I was like, oh my gosh, you really need to have a lot of money to have the kind of equipment that I would need to do what I want to do. So I was like, okay, how can I, you know, work with this? So I sort of did what I could within the limitations of that, and I was doing straight photography for a really, really long time. I was doing color, just sort of snapshots, get it developed at the drugstore, the Duane Reade or whatever. And then around that time I was sort of in and out of school. I ended up graduating from SUNY Empire State College, and so along the way of that I got introduced to black and white photography, and I'll never forget, I shot my first roll of black and white and I hated it, and I felt like there was absolutely no pleasure, no interest for me while I was doing the shooting. And then I saw the photographs, again developed by someone else, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I really like this. It's kind of boring, it's kind of flat, it's kind of uninteresting. And then I kept with it, and I did some coursework in it, and it really started to come alive for me. And I did a private study with someone that had a dark room downtown, learning how to print with filters, learning how to expose film, learning how to process film, and it just took off from there. It was no longer this mysterious thing that I gave to other people to do, and I got it back, and it's like, okay, well, that didn't turn out so well. Why? Now it's like I understand why, because I learned about metering, and I learned about exposure, and I learned about developing and the importance of time and temperature. So yeah. So it became a real hands-on and a real interest of mine, and to this day it's like even people who still work in the darkroom, and I've, you know, read and spoken to people, and everyone says the film processing is the most boring part. Even that I love. I don't know what it is, I just love it. It was about 2000, and I was here, and I had a lot of time on my hands, unfortunately. I had gotten injured on the job, so I was just sort of sitting around, and I was disabled partially for a while. And I was trolling around the internet, and I picked up a copy of one of these local papers, Our Town or something, and they talked about, and I'm vegetarian, mostly vegan, so someone did a little piece on a website that was veg singles. So I said, what the hell, you know? So I met somebody on there that lived down in the Maryland area near DC border, and we started seeing each other, and we got pretty serious pretty fast, and it was like a really big deal for me to come down there to visit on weekends, and for him to come up here. He would, you know, leave work and get here at like 9 o'clock on Friday night, and then he would leave at 4 a.m., you know, Sunday night into Monday morning in order to get back in time for work and stuff, and hope he wouldn't get caught in traffic on the Beltway or down here, you know, on 495. So between the two of us, it made more sense because he had a job down there for me to move down there. That was actually the genesis of the series, the architecture series that I'm still working on today. When I was here my last 2 years, I had a share essentially in a private rental darkroom. I had 1 day a week, a full 24 hours. I had the key. I could come and go as I wanted within that time, and I had full use of beautiful state-of-the-art darkroom in what were the remnants of the photo district when there were still even remnants to be had. I think all of that is gone now. So when I went to Maryland, I didn't really know much about the area, but I knew it was in New York. No place is New York, and I didn't know how long it was going to take for me to find a place to print, another private situation. So probably about 6 months before I left, I was printing in the darkroom this one day, and I'm printing this image, and I look at the image come up in the chemistry, and I'm like, I just got this light bulb overhead moment, and I said, oh my gosh, this is what I'm going to do when I get down there, when I'm looking for a darkroom. I'm going to print multiples of my images, and I'm going to cut them up, and I'm going to make collages. At least that way I won't be sitting there biting my nails, saying, when am I going to find a darkroom? How long is it going to take? How far away? What are going to be the logistical issues? I'll be able to keep my hand in with my photography and my art and my creativity and sort of keep that momentum going. So actually the first one I made is right across from us, the long, narrow one. That was the very first one that started the whole series. So when I got there, it took a while for me to sort of get situated. I was doing collages and moved a couple of times, and then we finally bought a house, and it took a couple of years to renovate, to make it livable. And but once all that was done, I started making, or done enough for me to have a space, I started making collages, and I started getting such a great response from people. I said, you know, the street photography was one thing, and people liked it, and you know, I got shows and whatever, but this is a whole new thing, and maybe I should sort of go in this direction because everyone's liking it, and I'm really enjoying doing it, and I think they're good too. So that went from the thing to do in the meantime to the main thing, and I'm still doing it now, and that was 2001 when I first started doing it in earnest, and it's 2017, right? Yeah, it's 2017, and I'm still doing it, still going strong with it. It's very experimental. I always kind of like to say that it tells me what it wants to be, and actually very often the collage will start when I'm walking around photographing. I'll see something, I'll see a building, or I'll see an architectural element on a building or an urban landscape, and something will click in my mind, and I'll say, oh, that's going to make a really good collage, quite possibly. So I'll do a bunch of shooting of that thing, and then, you know, I'll do the usual stuff. I'll process the film, and then when I make the prints, that'll sort of be the first acid test as to whether or not I like it enough, whether it seems like it wants to be a collage, or whether it's even a good enough photograph. So if I feel that it's something that's worthwhile, then I'll just go crazy in the darkroom. I'll spend days in there on this one image, making multiple prints. Very often what I'll do is I'll make, 15 or 20 or 30 prints of that image in normal orientation, and then I'll flip the negative in the enlarger and I'll make the same amount, 15, 20, 30 prints, the opposite orientation, so I'll have a mirror image when I go to make the collage. So once all of that paper processing part is done, when I'm sitting in the studio, I have a pair of cropping L's. I have a black pair down there, and I just happen to have a cardboard pair up here. And I'll just sort of sit there with the image, with the piece of paper, and I'll just experiment, and I've got a flexible curve, and sometimes I'll use that if I want, a curved thing. So I'll just sort of experiment, I'll pull random pieces of paper or card scraps, and I'll cover up certain parts and other parts. And I'll decide. So I really feel like it tells me what it wants to be. I have no preconceived notions. I don't know if it's going to work, how it's going to work, how big it's going to be, how intricate or not. I never know. I usually work on between 3 and 4 pieces at a time. That being said, sometimes I'll work on a piece that I can tell pretty early on is going to be pretty big, pretty complex. It's going to really require a lot of my time and energy. So sometimes the other things will kind of go to the side. There are also times where I'll make one collage, and then I'll have pieces left over from that, and I'll look at the leftover pieces and I'll go, oh, this looks interesting. So sometimes there'll be 7 iterations of a particular piece. I'll keep using leftover, 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 even though someone has told me that I shouldn't use the word leftover, but the remaining pieces. Sure. It gets exhausting physically and emotionally. I divide my time very randomly. Yeah. Last year was a really, 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 really busy year for me with shows in both places, especially the last quarter of 2016. So I was going back and forth constantly, and it was very hard to keep track of silly quotidian things like my laundry and feeding myself properly and getting enough rest, because every time I make the trip, it's about 7 hours door to door, and I'm, schlepping my clothes and whatever, art projects I want to work on here that I've brought from there, because I'll usually bring printed photographs, and I'll have my little satellite studio on my folding table here to cut up, and then, I'll bring the cut up pieces down there. So there's a lot of hauling of objects. There's a lot of self-care that sort of gets put in second place, and I'm not ever happy about that. So it's very exhausting, and I was going back and forth a lot, and I had very little time for my own art. I was doing a ton of promotion for the solo show I was in DC. I was doing a ton of promotion for all the other shows that I was invited to be in. Things were very, very tight, and from that experience, for me, the takeaway was that it felt like the tail was wagging the dog, and I was the one being wagged. I had lost control of my life. It was too much all at the same time. So, which, every artist would say, oh, come on, what are you complaining about? You should be happy that you're in all these shows. But the traveling, the back and forth constantly was really too much. I didn't have time for myself. I didn't for my own needs. I didn't have time for my artwork. So, what I did this year is I've begun experimenting. This past summer, I stayed in Maryland for over 2 months, and I decided that I was going to give myself the gift of nurturance to do a sort of home studio residency. So for 2 months, I made collages. I printed like crazy in the darkroom. I looked at my notebook where I make my notes of what I print, and I realized it had been a whole year since I'd been in there. I said, that's crazy, and that's not good, and that's not what I need. It's about doing my art, primary, because that feeds me. Just like food, just like air, that feeds me.